Aries Hamilton, a young millionaire heiress to a $200 million pharmaceutical empire, found herself questioning the very foundation of her marriage. Just 6 months earlier, she had walked down the aisle with Richard, a man who seemed perfect at first. But lately, she had noticed too many unsettling signs, secretive phone calls, messages that disappeared as soon as they arrived, and a growing impatience whenever he thought she wasn't looking. So when a staged accident left her supposedly paralyzed from the waist down, she decided to turn that tragedy into a test. Everyone believed she had suffered a terrible fall down the grand staircase of her Beverly Hills mansion, undergone surgery, and was now facing the possibility of never walking again. But Aries knew the truth. Her condition was nothing more than a carefully crafted ruse to see where Richard's heart truly stood. That morning, as she lay motionless in her luxurious hospital bed at home, Richard leaned over her with a forced smile. "Honey, are you sure you can't feel anything in your legs?" he asked for the third time, but his tone carried more annoyance than genuine worry. His eyes darted constantly toward his phone, as though he had better things to do. Aries studied every flicker of his expression, noting each pause and hesitation. When she murmured softly about the doctor's grim prognosis and asked if he would stay by her side, Richard hesitated, just long enough to confirm her darkest suspicions. He muttered promises of loyalty, but was already halfway to the door, claiming urgent business at the office. Moments later, Jerome Washington entered the room. At 45, the janitor had served her family for more than 15 years, long before Richard had ever appeared in her life. Unlike her husband, Jerome's concern was genuine. He adjusted her pillows, checked the room temperature, and spoke with a kindness that felt more comforting than all of Richard's empty words. "Miss Aries, how are you feeling today?" he asked gently. She whispered that he didn't need to worry, but deep inside, her resolve only grew stronger. This test, originally suggested by her lawyer after finding irregularities in Richard's financial dealings, was revealing the truth faster than she expected. Richard left in a rush, barely saying goodbye, while Jerome quietly lingered, tidying up with discreet glances of concern. When Aries asked if he could remain close by in case she needed anything, he agreed without hesitation, setting aside his own plans. In that moment, the contrast between the two men became painfully clear. Her husband was slipping further into suspicion and greed, while the humble janitor, often overlooked by everyone else, was proving to be the only one showing her real loyalty and care. And although her test had only just begun, Aries already knew who was failing it miserably, and who was quietly revealing the kind of love she had been searching for all along. For 6 months, Richard had been secretly paying rent on another woman's apartment, payments that suspiciously began just weeks before his wedding. As Victoria reviewed the documents, she noticed how carefully the transactions were hidden, as though Richard had applied the same sharp attention to detail he once used in managing company accounts. It became clear to her that this wasn't a fling that started after the vows. No, Richard had plotted this betrayal in advance, calculating that a wedding band would give him easier access to the Hamilton fortune than a relationship ever could. Closing the folder with a steady hand, Victoria turned to Jerome. "I need your help with something delicate. I want full visibility into the company's bank accounts. If Richard is moving money, I have to see every detail." That night, Jerome quietly wheeled her into the office. His years of experience in the mansion made him the perfect guide. He knew which steps creaked and which doors squealed, allowing them to move silently, like shadows. At the computer, Victoria's worst fears were confirmed. Nearly $2 million had been funneled into an account she didn't recognize. Even worse, Richard had executed the transfers using a temporary medical power of attorney granted on the basis of her supposed unstable mental state after the accident. Shocked, she muttered an uncharacteristic curse, something Jerome had never heard from her lips. Richard wasn't just unfaithful, he was dismantling her company piece by piece, all while she pretended to be helpless. But instead of despair, an idea sparked. If Richard was bold enough to weaponize her medical condition, then she would use that same condition to turn the game against him. "Jerome," she instructed firmly, "reach out to Thomas Bailey and tell him exactly what's happening." Bailey, one of the sharpest corporate fraud attorneys in the state, agreed to help under the cover of a rehabilitation specialist. Over the following days, he made routine checkups on Victoria, carefully gathering Jerome's evidence while building a case. Richard, meanwhile, grew careless, believing his scheme was untouchable. One afternoon, as Victoria feigned sleep, Isabella finally dared to step foot inside the mansion. Through a cracked door, Victoria watched her husband flaunt priceless family heirlooms, whispering promises that soon all of this will be ours. Isabella's hand lingered on a Ming vase, smirking as she asked if his wife would ever find out. Richard, brimming with arrogance, assured her it was impossible. The money was already moved, and the legal documents left Victoria powerless. That smugness made Victoria's blood boil, but she stayed silent. Her trap wasn't ready to close. 3 days later, she staged a medical relapse. Jerome placed an urgent call to Richard, who at that moment was wining and dining Isabella at an expensive restaurant, the bill charged to Victoria's corporate card. "Sir, the doctor says it's important you come home immediately," Jerome explained. But Richard brushed him off coldly, claiming he was in an important meeting and telling him to handle it. Listening on the extension, Victoria finally made her choice. The test was over. Richard had failed. He had chosen another woman over his sick wife without hesitation. "Jerome," she said with quiet determination, "tomorrow we make a call that will change everything." Richard had no idea she was already 3 steps ahead. Every fraudulent transfer, every neglectful moment, every secret meeting was now documented. Even more damning, she had uncovered a piece of his past that would leave him legally defenseless. While he celebrated what he thought was an easy victory, Victoria Hamilton was preparing the perfect reckoning. The trap snapped shut one Thursday afternoon. Richard returned home expecting to find his disabled wife in bed. Instead, he walked into the living room to see her poised elegantly in her favorite armchair, legs crossed, a glass of wine in hand, and a smile sharp enough to cut glass. "Hello, darling," she said coolly. "How was your day stealing my company?" The kiss slipped from Richard's trembling hands. He stammered in shock as she stood gracefully and revealed the truth. She had never been paralyzed. With controlled precision, she laid out everything: Isabella's affair, the transfers, his plan to have her committed. On the coffee table sat neatly arranged folders of evidence, bank statements, and recordings. Richard panicked, trying to spin excuses, but Jerome stepped forward silently, no longer just the quiet caretaker, but her steadfast protector. When 2 detectives and attorney Bailey walked in moments later, arrest warrants in hand, Richard's world crumbled. Victoria's laughter echoed as she reminded him of the nights he abandoned her, the lies he fed Isabella, the empire he thought he could steal. As he was handcuffed and led away, she looked him in the eye one last time. "You mistook me for weak, Richard. That will be the costliest mistake of your life." Months later, the Hamilton empire wasn't just intact, it was thriving. Jerome, once overlooked as just the janitor, now sat in the boardroom as her right-hand man, his MBA and sharp instincts finally recognized. Richard, meanwhile, rotted in prison, haunted by headlines and photographs of Victoria and Jerome's success splashed across magazines. Isabella, exposed as a con artist, faced charges of her own. And in a twist even Victoria hadn't imagined, the bond she and Jerome forged through loyalty and truth blossomed into something deeper. Years later, they married, not out of revenge or convenience, but because in her darkest moment, he had seen her not as a fortune, not as a victim, but as a human being worth protecting. The heiress who once tested love discovered that true love had been standing quietly beside her all along.